Hey, everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name is Jake Milstein, and happy 2024. We are here to talk about a new thing that ransomware criminals are doing, contacting the consumers, the patients, the parents. It's a real elevation in what the bad guys are doing and a new tactic. And what we've seen is that there's been a serious ramp up here, and what the data show is that this will happen more and more in 2024. In fact, it happened two times that we know of quite publicly in 2023, and so we wanted to tell everyone about it because it creates a lot of changes for folks. So before we get started, if you haven't been to our events before, there are a couple things you need to know. Number one, there's a chat on the right. If you want to join, if you want to say in the chat where you're joining from, we'd love to know. I am in a basement in Seattle where it is no longer snowing, which is great. You can mute the chat if you want. Sometimes it goes ding, ding, ding. There's a little bell on the right. You can hit the bell and it'll stop dinging if it is dinging. And you will get a recording of this, and we will pass along the slide deck after the webinar because people always ask. Who are we? Critical Insight defends critical infrastructure. We help organizations prepare for a cyber attack, detect one quickly with our security operations centers here in the Pacific Northwest, and respond decisively to those attacks. And joining us today is Mike Borgia from Davis Wright Tremaine. Mike, will you introduce yourself and say hi?
Sure. Thanks. Great to be here with everyone. Mike Borgia. I'm a partner at the law firm Davis Wright Tremaine. We are a Seattle-based law firm. I myself am based in Denver, and I am the lead of the firm's information security practice group. So breach response and breach preparedness and things like that.
And if you've been to our panels before, you've seen Mike Borgia. He brings a wealth of information and a different take on things than your InfoSec pros because, well, he's a lawyer. And we love having him here. Thanks for us. Mike Hamilton Mike Hamilton and Fred both founded Critical Insight. Mike is our current CISO, and he's the former CISO of the city of Seattle. Fred is our chief product officer. And my name is Jake Milstein. I run marketing and run our events as well, even though it's a CMO for those of you who are in medical. It's marketing, not medical, which is a big disappointment to my grandmother. All right. So here's what happened. So what I'm going to do now is go through a series of events so that everybody knows what happened that sort of created this situation. So in November, Integris Health, based in Oklahoma, had a ransomware attack. In December, criminals started emailing Integris patients. This was what their email said. We've contacted Integris Health, but they refuse to resolve this issue. We give you the opportunity to remove your personal data from our databases before we sell the entire database to data brokers on January 5th, 2024. And by the way, they sent this on Christmas Eve. When you think of the victims of an attack, you think of the healthcare victims, but these are the people whose data was taken in the ransomware attack. Presumably, what happened is what happens in most ransomware attacks, Fred, which is that, they exfiltrate data and then lock up the network, right?
Absolutely. It's double dipping by first exfiltrating the data. That's one of the reasons that the ransomware attacks may take a week or two before they execute them, but they want to get that data first. Once they have that data, then they can explode whatever kind of malware they want on the endpoint. And sometimes these days it's just erases everything and ruins the system. So having that data is an ace in the hole, right? If you have a ransom that you refuse to pay, now you can then extort the entity whose data was stolen, and further, now of course they're going one step farther and leaning into the people whose data was stolen themselves.
Right.
Really
so what we used to call double extortion is now triple extortion.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that happened was, and by the way, this is all from an article in Bleeping Computer. Next thing that happened to these folks at Integris was in that email, they had a link to names, social security numbers, dates of birth, what your hospital visit info was, and patients were told to pay $3 to view the information and then $50 to remove it. And one thing that's a little unclear is how you would pay the bad guys. Would you give them your credit card number or
or one
anyway.
1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin?
Right. And so, that's what happened there. Now, also in November, there was a breach at the Fred Hutch Cancer Center in Seattle. And then in December, same pattern, right? In December, patients begin to receive emails from criminals. If you're reading this, your data has been stolen and will soon be sold to various data brokers and black markets to be used in fraud and other criminal activities. Now, Mike Hamilton, this one took an extra step because patients began receiving swatting threats. What?
Well, I don't think they actually. So they weren't getting swatted.
Right.
They
But
were
the
being
threat was there.
threatened with that, which begs the question: are these domestic actors, or are they on the other side of the world where they couldn't actually make good on a threat like that? But yeah, there were a lot of people that got these swatting threats, and trying to get them to pay to remove their record. They were using the language that they use in the dark markets, which I thought was interesting, because they said, we will give you exclusivity over your record for $50. And that's what we would sell your record for online, which is inconsistent with what everything I've heard about health records being worth something like $400 to $1,000. Selling them for $50, direct to consumer sales here. So number one, that's a heck of a discount. Number two, the language that they're using about exclusivity, you're going to believe criminals that, they're not going to resell those things over and over and over. I don't know. I just think this was a bad business decision on the part of the bad guys. The better call would have been to threaten to just expose all and just make everything public. And Fred Hutch, you'll get a class action suit for sure, at least one. And that may have gotten attention better. But this tactic doesn't seem to be going away. This seems to be a new business model.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that they took it to, we're going to send a SWAT team to your house by making a fake 911 call, took this to another level. And then, of course, Fred Hutch is trying to do its best to communicate with patients through their portal, through email, through letters, call center. Barbara in the chat says she got a letter from them. So did I.
Me too.
And so, but that doesn't mean that everybody is happy, right? So Seattle Times had an article yesterday, this person, JM, who's not me, same initials, not me, says, was very unhappy that I'm not being informed is a further negligence. I don't understand. It's a really lousy way to treat patients, so, Mike Borgia, I know you've been involved in, creating these post-breach letters. How do you put this in a letter to patients?
Yeah, well, it kind of depends where you are in the situation. I mean, you may not. So the letters you're going to write are probably geared towards your breach notification obligations under state law, or if you the federal law that applies to you. But you might put this into an FAQ. Like, what do you do if contacted? So if when you're putting these materials together, our patients are, getting contacted, or customers, whatever individuals are getting contacted, you may put something in there about, well, what should I do? Right. And that's difficult because I think as a company, you don't really want to, it's hard for you to really say what you should do. Right. I mean, I think the easy answer is like, don't pay these people. That's a stupid thing to do. But it's hard to say that, and different circumstances vary. And if someone says, okay, you told me not to pay, I'm not going to pay, and then their medical records get leaked, and that's just setting you up to say, well, I'm going to get sued now because I was told. Not only did you lose the data, but then also you told me not to pay. So probably there's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do other than, for example, say, we're aware of this. It's the bad actors, here's some resources. Contact the FBI, contact police. Here's some resources from the FTC. I don't really know what else you can do, unfortunately, in that moment. Or working with you may want to encourage them to contact you or report it to the FBI, because you do want to get information about this, and as does law enforcement, knowing where these calls, what numbers are being used and what are they saying and things like that. So that's something you may encourage them to do. Please report this if you receive one of these calls, but it's hard to advise them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I come at this from a little bit different direction than Mike Borgia. My history, I ran newsrooms for a while, and I've run communications, and I think there's there's the legal side of it, and then there's the transparent side of it. One of the things that I know Fred Hutch did was to set up an 800 number, as Mike Borgia said, hey, call us, or at least you let us know if these things are happening. But, this question of, advising people to pay or not pay, I don't think you can do that. But, Fred, even organizations, it's hard to decide whether to pay or not pay the bad guy, right?
That's a $64,000 question. The one thing I always tell people is make that decision before you're ever in the position, right? So you need to have sat down and determined, are we by policy going to pay ransoms? You should have that determined long before this. And if you are, you should already have contracted with a company that will help you negotiate through that process, so you're not taking advantage of it and you're prepared. It's all about being prepared, right? And most people wait till this happens. And I don't want to be making that kind of decision while the house is burning down in front of me.
And so, Mike Hamilton, for a consumer, for somebody who just got into this, and Patrick is making this point in the chat, telling a consumer, to pay or not pay. I mean, in some ways, you can't trust a bad guy. And they may just be trying to get more information from you.
Yeah. And somebody made the point that, what are you going to give them a credit card for this? You're going to give your credit card to a criminal, or are they processing the payment for Bitcoin with credit card? And is this, could this be a ruse to just collect credit card numbers for people that you freak out sufficiently with these threats? I don't know. I mean, I'm in the don't even worry about this category. I think somebody in the chat made this same point about everything I have has been exposed in the MoveIt breach. So what difference does it make, right? The stuff is out there. It's out there in 97 different ways. This is just another drop in that gigantic ocean of disclosed records. Personally, if I was going to advise somebody, this is like, don't take it seriously, right? You're at no more risk than you ever were. That's what I think.
I think that's the telling component of this entire event, is that this is really to put more pressure on Fred Hutch to come back to the table and pay a ransom. That's what this is about, because the thought of collecting, $500 here and there
won't scale.
Ridiculous. Yeah, that's not a scalable thing. They can already do a swatting attack on anybody by paying $25 a month on whitepages.com. You can get any email address and local address pair of anybody in this country and start launching those. That whole swatting thing is a complete red herring. Okay, that's purely to put pressure on Fred Hutch or whomever they're doing this to, because you could do this as a thing without ever getting involved in a breach like this.
This is exactly my point. This is exactly my point about why do this? Why not just tell Fred Hutch, listen, we make all this stuff public. Everybody's going to sign up as a plaintiff and come after you in a class action, seeing it happen over and over and over. That would have been the right threat if they wanted to get them to pay, right? The class action is going to cost you more than the extortion demand we're making.
Well, so let me get to that and what the purpose is. Mike Borgia, you went on mute. Do you want to chime in there?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know what's in the attacker's head, but I can speculate. And I think one speculation is, so you get these things and the attackers say, if you pay us, we'll just go away and you won't have to deal with this. And if you don't pay us, we're going to delete it. And then, if you don't pay us, we won't delete it, rather. And then this will become public and you'll get sued and things like that, right? But essentially what that means is if you pay us, you can cover it up. And what companies understand much of the time is if we already have a legal obligation to notify, then we're probably going to notify. We don't want to be in a situation where we say, look, like, and we all know, right? If an attacker gets social security numbers or driver's license numbers or medical information or whatever, and that goes out the door, that's a breach. You can't say, well, it's not a breach because we paid the hackers, so we're good, right? No one's going to buy that. And so what was happening, I think, having a lot of conversations with clients about this, is that companies were saying, well, why would I pay these guys? I have to report this thing anyway under federal or state law, so it doesn't save me anything. And oddly, I think a lot of them had the thought, and I think this is right, that, if we pay these guys, they probably will delete it. And that probably will create real risk harm mitigation for the individuals. But no one's going to believe that's true who doesn't do this stuff, right? We might think that's true because we understand the attackers, we understand the repeat player issue that they have, right? Although that being said, we always say, as we should, you don't know what the attacker is going to do. There's no guarantee, right? But maybe you're buying 50% likelihood that they delete the data. But again, you can't go to an individual, let alone a regulator, and say, don't worry, there's no harm to you because we paid the hackers who are in, Bulgaria or whatever, right? That's not going to work. So what they're trying to do here is just say, I think the attackers may realize, look, you're going to disclose this. You're going to have to deal with the lawsuits anyway, but we're going to make it extra bad for you because we're going to freak out all of your customers and terrify them. And we're going to try to destroy your reputation and burn you into the ground. And that's the pressure. That's the pressure. You're going to have to face the lawsuits anyway. But worse if both we hurt your reputation and maybe we can even fuel those lawsuits. Because right now the lawsuits are largely this. My data was exposed. I have no way of proving whether or not I've suffered any harm because of that. But I had to take precautions. And so I want money. I want compensation for the time and effort I had to go into getting credit monitoring and all that stuff, right? But if this is like, and I was harassed by hackers, and this happened, and that happened, just giving more and more fuel to these class actions.
And so, Mike, do you see the class actions getting either? I mean, I can't say that they're going to get more common because I haven't actually seen a recent breach that didn't then have a class action. But do you see them getting bigger in terms of the dollar amount and in terms of the number of people involved?
No, but I see more claims being added to them because of this.
Got it.
And maybe getting easier to overcome barriers to standing. I don't want to get super to standing, it's very legalistic, but like essentially when you go to court, you have to prove a number of things, including that, like, you have harm, right? Mm-hmm. You can't go to court and say, like, I saw someone punch someone else, I want to sue on behalf of the guy who got punched. Like, you're not the person who suffered harm. You have to prove that you have harm. And this was going to help you get past that barrier. But you're right. I mean, separate from this, we've just seen a total explosion in class actions where everything is class actions. Not long ago, if we had a client that had, say, a breach of 60,000 records, you'd be like, no, you might not. It's hard to say. It's not that big of a breach. Now you have a client with a breach of 60,000 records and they get 12 class actions. I mean, that has really exploded. So that's already, unfortunately, very much part of the landscape already.
And you making a good point about ramping up emotional distress in the victims, and that's going to add to the request from the plaintiffs for redress. That's a really good point.
People get freaked out by this stuff. I mean, it's easy for us. We're in this space, and you're like, "Oh, God, my data got breached, whatever." But people get freaked out, and when you work on these for clients, they've got individuals who are just losing it, and they're terrified of this stuff, and we can say whether that's reasonable or not, but I get it. I understand it. And this is going to terrify them all that much more. I hate to say it. I think it's kind of a brilliant tactic in the sense that this is really trying to hit companies where it hurts, which is in their reputation with their customers. And I think there are companies out there that may say, look, we'll suck up the class actions. We'll deal with it. It is what it is. But we're really worried about our customers, patients, whatever, getting harassed over this.
Right.
That's really something I want to avoid.
Yeah. And I want to answer a couple of questions in the chat, and then I want to loop back to something Fred said earlier. So, one thing that came up in the chat, David says, was the EHR exposed. It's a little unclear. The hospitals or the systems haven't said, but what we do know, and certainly in some of the ones that came up that I'm about to bring up, is they got a lot of medical information, including photos. I haven't seen that from Fred Hutch or Integris, but we have seen that from some others that I'm about to talk about. Second, Travis says, did anyone read about the hacker group filing an SEC complaint against their victim? And so what happened there was, so the SEC said that, you have to file a form if you have a breach of a certain size. Ransomware group did it. They say that they attacked a company and that the company didn't file the form. So the bad guys outed them for not filing the form. I think that goes back to the bigger question here of we're seeing all of a sudden a bunch of new tactics from the ransomware bad guys. That one, people sort of chuckled at that one, and it showed some wherewithal in the ransomware gang. But I think was less alarming than them contacting the consumers and patients and parents. And to that end, we've been talking about healthcare, but here's a school district. And this happened in October 2021. There was some writing about it, but it really didn't catch on. But this did happen a couple of years ago. What we're seeing now is a big ramp up here. October 2021, Allen Independent School District. It's near Dallas. They're hit by ransomware, and then parents get emails. We've been reading news and watching the video in the news article with feeling of frustration for how your education provider care about your data and personal life. We can understand that they try to fool us, but they do same effective with you, trying to get parents to call the school district. And by the way, the grammar is obviously theirs and not ours. But, trying to get the parents to call the school district and say, hey, get them to pay the ransom. And Fred, you talked about the red herring of trying to get individuals to pay because that doesn't scale. This one, they just said, hey, call the school district to get them to do it. And you think this is what it's really all about, that they just want to get patients, parents, whatever, to call the organization to pay the $1 million ransom or $5 million ransom.
Yeah. The way I look at these events are a maturation of the hacker, economy. This is a relatively mature business model now. They're looking for ways to innovate. This aligns directly with tech, right? Look at how they're doing. They're aligning directly with how tech has evolved. Now they are starting to look for more scalable ways to do it. They're looking to innovate with new and more effective ways to put pressure on it. And they will continue to evolve this in a business model sense because there's a lot of money supporting this. And it will move like any other industry forward. And unfortunately, we're going to have to get better, and we're going to all have to become more informed about what this means. We're in an age of disinformation, and this is yet another component of that same thing.
Yeah.
So I want to make a quick comment too. So I also think that because of the glut of records that are out there and all the dark markets that are selling all the health records and all the finance records and all the privacy information, all that stuff, if you're a criminal, how do you differentiate your product, your data set from others on anything but price? So again, they're only asking $50 a record, which they're not intending to scale that at all. But I do think that in that mature criminal enterprise ecosystem, there is downward pricing pressure on these records, and they're looking for new ways to generate revenue on this. And I'll say one other thing, that you could put a wrapper, or as we've discussed this, we can put a wrapper around these things and say they've learned how to use our own laws against us. as leverage to get people to pay extortion demands, right? You don't pay us, SEC comes after you, Federal Trade Commission, False Claims Act, class action. It's cheaper to pay us, right? And that's because we wrote the laws to create the baseball bat to hit ourselves in the head with.
Well, we talked about a couple of others too, this, and then we saw a big ramp up from that 2021. Really, we didn't see much of this activity in 2022. And then in 2023, we saw multiple times where the bad guys went after the consumers. So Lehigh Valley Health hit by ransomware in February. The criminals then released photos of nude female cancer patients to try to get the organization to pay. I don't know if the organization paid, but that was a real notable thing that happened. And then in June, a Beverly Hills plastic surgery office was breached, and the criminals both threatened release of images and then demanded payment, Mike, from both the patient and surgeon.
Yes. And so the details around this one are a little lurid, and I don't want to go into them, but this was a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills. And what was stolen from the plastic surgeon was not only the before and after nude photos of all of his patients, some of whom were celebrities. There was also apparently, we'll just say, home movies of him. And so, yes, they were extorting both the patients and the surgeon. I'm not entirely sure this guy is still in business because the PR hit that he took was pretty bad from this. I actually got called to be on TV station in Southern California to talk about this, and it was lurid.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but I think I think the trend is very clear that we're going to continue to see this, and that this ramped up over the course of 2023, and in 2024 we're going to see more of this. Yeah. So there are some, really good questions in the chat here. So one of the good questions, they're all good questions. One of the best questions is, so what is our advice to communicating about this, right? So, and how do you change what you're going to do knowing that this is a possibility? For example, if you get hit by ransomware and you know that this is a criminal tactic, and you begin to communicate with the public, right? Like, it could be an urgent situation. The hospital is shut down. If it's a hospital, or the school district has to shut down for a day, do you at that point, in a news conference, in a statement, in whatever, do you say, hey, there is a possibility that you could get a call or you could get an email from a criminal? I'll start with Mike Borgia. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to put pressure on victims to communicate more candidly and faster. And I think you've seen an evolution over time of this, that not long ago, before ransomware was just everywhere all the time, companies would get hit and they would say, well, we've had an outage, and they would kind of say that for weeks, and then they'd say, okay, it was ransomware. But now we're seeing companies either come out immediately and say it was ransomware, or kind of do the incident, outage, whatever, for a couple of days, and then go, okay, here's the full story. And I think you're going to have to get into that full story much sooner than you might otherwise. The good news here, I think, is that cyber attacks they're much more common than they used to be. And people, although some people, as I mentioned, do really freak out, people are used to this and they come to expect it. And this is not as exotic as it used to be. So, not long ago, when you say, "Oh, in a ransomware attack," everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is insane!" And now, people are like, "Oh, this is my third letter this month." And I don't mean to minimize it, but like, this kind of goes into the ether in a way. So I think it makes sense, not just because of this, but it makes sense that companies have shifted to faster, more transparent communications, and I think you're gonna have to do that. So another thing to consider here is, you may know, you get those letters, and it takes a while to do the letters. A lot of governments think you just pump those out, but you got to figure out who's involved and what data, and you got to send the letters out, and that takes some time, and the addresses and all that stuff. What I would expect we'll see people here is trying to come more often if they know it's a group that does this, come out proactively with press releases, maybe informal, if you will, like not sort of tailored to all legal requirements, but emails and things like that saying, hey, this has happened. You need to be aware of this. Here's what you may see. And things like that.
And, you know, as somebody who's worked in journalism for a long time, I agree with that. You know, I think that it is super important to let people know what to expect. And that, you know, you like that comment we saw from that angry person at Fred Hutch. You know, if you let people know ahead of time, hey, these are the things that could happen, you know, you come off as more transparent. You are being more transparent. I also, you know, I also think if people are prepared for the worst and then it doesn't get that bad, you know, you're in a better situation and they're in a better situation. And, you know, lastly, you know, on that point, when you know, if you know that this is a trend and you let people know, you know, and then they end up getting an email or, you know, a phone call, you know, they'll be more ready to respond to it than just getting it out of the blue. It, you know, could be very alarming. I don't know, Fred, how do you think it changes organizations, you know, communication plan when they get hit by ransomware?
Well, I have to speak to the point that comes right before that communication plan, because you can't do the communication plan unless you've identified, done your forensics, done an investigation, so you can then effectively communicate. Being transparent is absolutely a goal. Everybody should strive for to do it quickly, but you have to say things that you know are true when you publish them. The worst thing you can do is say things that go, you know what? It's a lot worse than we thought. Now, a lot more people are involved, right? That slow trickle starts, you know, eating away at your credibility. So I believe you've got to be able to have the forensic capabilities to effectively determine what happened, who was involved, and then be able to rapidly, transparently communicate.
So let me push back on that and ask a question, Fred. What if you don't know? What if you don't, you know, you haven't, ahead of your attack, you don't have a security operations center, you're not looking at all your logs, and you know that there's something weird in your system, and then you get a ransomware screen, you know, saying, hey, we've locked you up, we're the Lockbit gang, or, you know, one of the gangs that are out there. When do you then say, okay, I'm gonna communicate?
Well, I think immediately you have to call your insurance company if you have a cyber insurer, because they will likely guide you through this process. They may provide a breach coach and even a negotiation team and a communication team to assist you in that process. So that's the first step. Lacking that, again, then you need to bring a team together. You need somebody to handle communications. If you don't have that, you need somebody to do your investigation internally. You need people to help you recover. Right. And then you need to put together a executive view of what happened so you can then communicate that. Doing that on the fly, I mean, a big company, experienced company can't do that on the fly. So we tell people you got to prepare.
And, you know, Mike Hamilton, we talk to people all the time about incident response planning. You know, how does this new tactic, and frankly, you know, the new tactic. So there's this and there's the filing with the SEC and, you know, but you know, this one seems more alarming. How do you now do you this year, now that you know that this is happening, have to update your incident response plan? And if so, you know, what do you put in it?
Okay, well, I'm going to push back a little bit myself on what Fred said, because while he is correct, if you were going to report, communicate, here's what happened, you need to really be informed about what happened. However, to answer your question, Jake, if empirically we see this starting to happen with greater frequency and it becomes, you know, out there known, this is a new tactic, we're likely to see it, I think communication plans are going to change. And right away, when something happens, we've experienced a cyber event. In the event that you are contacted by criminals, as this is a new tactic that has been observed, here's what we want you to do. And I would frankly say, want you to contact law enforcement because, threats like this, we want to tally these up so we know what the magnitude of that problem is. That means people got to report it. I would, then say we will update you as more details emerge as to exactly what kind of, data may have been taken. And, if you're not informed yet about that, you can still create the perception and manage the expectation that stuff is under control here. This thing might happen to you. Here's a couple of tips on what to do. We'll get back to you. And I think that is straightforward. I think that's probably what insurance companies are going to advise communication plans looks like.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Fred.
I would agree, except if you're a publicly traded company, then that could be a disaster.
That's true.
Communication. Okay.
Publicly traded hospital, it might be, you may be 100% right there.
I mean, Mike Borgia, taking the communications back to you, I mean, I think that there's a difference between what you are legally required to do and and brand protection.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
You may
leave
aside the SEC.
Are you going to do something? Are you going to do something? Yeah.
Because I do want to talk about the SEC because it's extremely.
Yeah, go for it. Go ahead. Yeah.
But yes, let's say for private companies, that's true. You're not going to be required to go out with a statement in 24 hours or 48 hours, right? But it might be the right thing to do if you're worried that in a day or two, you're going to start seeing customers contacted like this. And you hire a cybersecurity firm, threat intel firm, right? They'll be able to help you understand that. And I agree. I mean, I think that less is more in this sense. And you really want to avoid having to backtrack if you can. It happens. And if it happens, it's not a disaster, but it's not, it can be, but it's usually not. But you want to say less is more. And I think things like, yes, there has been a cyber attack. We are dealing with it. Lots of resources, et cetera, et cetera. Here's what, we're writing to tell you that this may happen, right? So at least they're hearing it from us first, which is going to hopefully stem any kind of accusation of like, oh, it's being covered up and yada, yada, right? We're being transparent.
Yep.
But you have to understand too, that we do not have a legal system right now that that incentivizes transparency, right? The regulators will tell you should be transparent, but we're going to sue you anyway, right? So be careful about that because, there are a lot of companies right now that have been very successful with very transparent approaches. But it's interesting that many of those companies are doing that. They don't have a lot of direct consumer data. If you start looking at these companies that go out and say, here's all of our forensics, here's everything, we're super transparent, you realize this company has no consumer data. They're not going to get hit by a class action. Less likely to get hit by AG. They could be subject to an AG investigation, a state attorney general, but less likely if they have no consumer data. So, keep that in mind. I was going to say the SEC piece is very difficult, and the SEC has made a policy decision, and the policy decision is, to be honest, cybersecurity is not as important as disclosure. And I hate to say it like that, but it's true. Because there is no delay in that. I mean, the delay provision they have is almost a joke. It's so narrow. And so we're already dealing with companies that have an ongoing cyber incident that is not contained. They know the attacker is still in there. They know they have vulnerabilities. It's a 0-day vulnerability that they know it's probably material. They know an attacker is exploiting it. They just got the patch from the vendor because if it's 0-day, it's going to take them like a week, but they need to go and they need to disclose this and say, we've had this vulnerability, right? Hit us, just attack us, go for it, right? The SEC has made that policy decision and it's a really difficult one to navigate. Now you should work with your attorney on that to see, let's try to figure out what room we do have to work and try to navigate this. So we're not being forced to disclose this incident, or maybe we can get away with disclosing just enough details to meet the requirements, but not so much as to say exactly how we could be exploited. But it's a tough line, right? Because you need to disclose material information. One could argue that this is a 0-day, it's this 0-day, whatever, that's material. at the same time, again, you're really trying not to tell bad actors, hey, we use this software. This software is vulnerable. We've not yet patched it, just to let you know. Mm-hmm. So it's really, really hard. It's just a huge mess, but there's no easy answer to it other than you've got to sit with your attorneys and say, we got to walk this line. How do we do that?
And aren't there's two delay mechanisms, as I remember, right? One is law enforcement, and the other one was the SEC itself. I can't remember what they were, but you're right. They don't last long.
There's one for the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. So if you have what's called customer proprietary network information, CPNI, there is a delay provision around that. And so it basically says, just leave that in place. We're not going to mess with that one. The law enforcement one is extremely narrow. So maybe you've seen law enforcement delay provisions in state law. And it basically says, if law enforcement says that disclosure could disrupt the investigation, then you don't have to, you can wait. And you rarely get that, law enforcement will try to be helpful, but ultimately they often say, look, I mean, here's the deal. Like, it's probably not going to disrupt anything. I mean, if there's anything I can say that's helpful and truthful, I'll do it. But that's just the reality is if you go and notify, it's not really going to mess us up. The SEC one is so narrow that the Attorney General of the United States, right, has to decide that I don't have the exact standard in front of me, but I think something like it's a substantial risk or threat to national security or public safety. That's going to be a tough one. Now, maybe if you're a hospital, you can say this is a substantial risk to public safety, possibly, but that's very, very high bar, right? Not many companies can say that their operations are going to pose a substantial risk to national security. Even public safety could be a tough one. So I wouldn't count on that. Because again, that's just written so narrowly.
So, I also want to go back to one of the first things you said there in talking about, communication plans and how you communicate. So, I have interacted with a lot of communication firms. I've seen a lot of tabletop exercises, and one of the things I've seen is, folks have templates for how to do this, and just follow the plan that we've used and it'll be fine. So one thing I'd say to everybody in attendance and everybody watching is you can't use an old communications plan anymore. Like this changes the game. And if you are going to be the kind of organization that communicates transparently about this risk, then your incident response plan, your communication plan, what you're planning to say in your news conference or how you're going to communicate, that has to change now because you have to warn people about this. And if you're planning in 2024 to do a tabletop exercise, and you should do one every year, if you're planning to do a tabletop exercise, you should include this scenario in it. And I'll tell you why. Because I was in a room with a group of CEOs and John Rigi from the American Hospital Association. And, one of the CEOs said, I'll never pay the ransom. I'll never pay the ransom. I'll never pay the ransom. And then he said, you start getting calls from patients who say that they are, getting threatening calls from criminals that they're going to release their pictures from inside the hospital. And the CEO said, okay, I'm paying the ransom, right? I think your executive team, your board need to, and it doesn't matter. You're in healthcare, you're in public sector, you're in, you're in a school district, whatever you do, the execs need to know that this is a real danger. There's a case that I heard of, and I haven't seen it reported, so can't say it, where the bad guys started calling the listed board members on the website of the organization that was hit and threatening them individually. So I think we're going to see this more and more and more. There are a bunch of questions in the chat here. One of them is from Daniel about how long do these things last? Like, another healthcare facility dealt with a cybersecurity attack is Liberty Hospital in Liberty City, Missouri. They're 4 weeks into the attack. They're still dealing with it. How long do you typically see these things drag on between class action lawsuits, alternative secondary attacks, etc.? I'll tell a story, and then Fred, you should give the IT answer, and then Mike Borgia, you can give the legal answer. But the one quick thing I'll say is there's somebody who's been on our webinars before. His hospital didn't get out of the IT mess for 6 months. 6 months, and then all of their systems were back online. But Fred, what have you seen?
Yeah, it literally can run from, you can be out of the woods in a day, or you could be 6 months cleaning things up. It all depends on how quickly you identify things, how quickly you respond. Everything is about that speed to reply to what's going on. So most of them are probably 2 to 3 weeks of very intensive work, and then maybe a couple weeks of cleanup. So about 6 weeks might be a kind of an average life cycle for this. Again, if you're actually paying a ransom, it'll probably take you longer than if you decide to recover from backups. As long as you have immutable backups in place, that is a much faster path than paying ransom. Decryption takes days. Loading from backup takes hours. So again, these decisions you make ahead of time are going to really affect how quickly you recover from something like this.
Yeah, Mike Borgia and the lawsuits, I saw you answer in the chat, but they can go on for years, right?
Yeah, lawsuits or government investigations can go on for years. It varies quite a bit. I've seen companies get hit with a class action, and 6 months later they settled it. Sometimes your insurer just like, we're just going to settle this. We don't want to deal with this. But you should be prepared. Unfortunately, it can take years, and it's, if you read the news and this stuff, and you see, whatever AG or FTC or whoever settles with company over data breach, go look at the dates on that thing, and you'll often see this is a 2017, 2018 breach. These didn't happen 6 months ago. It just takes a very, very long time. So you can be dealing with that. Now, that the good news, I guess, is that it isn't like for 5 years you're dealing with this every day. What happens is there'll be some discovery request, produce a bunch of documents, everyone's hair is on fire, and then you sit for 6 months and nothing happens. Then it comes back again and just kind of goes like that. But yeah, and it's a challenge. Fortunately, most breaches obviously don't result in enforcement, so that's good. But we are seeing more and more result in class actions. Now, one thing I'll say about class actions is important is that class actions really are, this is becoming less true, but it's still true, is that class actions have the most success for data that is susceptible to credit theft or ID theft, right? Because it's easier to establish that there's harm or risk of harm. So one of the things I can encourage anyone to do is to sit down and really think about, do we collect SSNs? We collect driver's license numbers. Why do we collect those things? Can we get rid of that? And if we can, let's do it. Because then if we have a breach, either maybe we won't have to notify, or maybe we'll at least put ourselves in a situation where we can say, look, the data that we have, it's just, it's hard. It's hard to know what to do with. It's right. And that's one thing about medical data, like the naked pictures of patients. That's a whole other story. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. But like, you take this medication or that, or things like that. That's going to be harder for a plaintiff's attorney to come in and say, oh, the harm of that is worth X. Yep. What is the harm of someone knowing that you take X medication? Now, if it's an HIV medication, different, right? But generally speaking, that's going to be hard to, it's going to make it harder for a class action to be successful when it's not ID theft type of information.
Yeah. And so, two things. Number one is, Fred, to your point, if you have immutable backups and you can just, get everything going again in a day, 2 days, 3 days, that's why the ransomware, terrorists are doing this, because they still want you to pay, even if you're back up and running, by, saying, hey, we stole the data and we're going to sell it. That's the second part of the double extortion. Second, Charles, Fred, did you want to say something about that?
I was going to say that, and this is where I would say that you don't pay the ransom. That data's still out there, no matter how much you pay them. They're going to sell it to some other data broker, and 2 years later, it's going to pop up someplace else. It just won't have their hands on it. So that data is gone. It is gone forever once it leaves your premises.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Charles makes a good point about, how long it takes for organizations to come back up in the chat, which is, even after you get all your systems back up. You then have to prove to all of your vendors, to everybody who you work with. And I know that this was a problem for an organization in Idaho when they got hit, was proving to everybody, yeah, hey, you can log back in again, we're safe, was a real difficult thing, especially with their EHR vendor. For those of you not in healthcare, that's the electronic health record system that they use. And I do want to go to one other thing in the chat. I forget who said it. I think it was Aaron. Yeah, so. Aaron disagreed with you, Mr. Hamilton, and said, I don't know why everyone thinks the $50 isn't relevant or scalable. If 5% response for even 100,000 victims is $250,000, which is not insignificant. I mean, so does that change your mind about whether you think that they're actually trying to get the money from individuals?
Yes and no. I mean, so that $250,000 is a fraction of what they would extort out of the organization itself. And in order to process all of those payments, you're going to have a team of people working on all that stuff. So, do they want to stand up a new division in Cyber Criminal Incorporated to, handle payments? Maybe. I don't know. I still don't think that. I agree with Michael Borgia that causing emotional distress through this, direct reach out and touch. It would add to the class action suit, and frankly, that's what the criminals. I agree with that. I think that's what they're doing. I think it's more to ramp up the terror so that people want to sue the hospital more than they're trying to extort $50 a piece from everybody.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you used that.
I think they're sophisticated, and I wouldn't doubt if they talk to lawyers, hopefully not anyone practicing in the US, but yeah. I don't know, like someone who's moved or whatever. But I don't doubt that they've got great computer programmers, right? Why not lawyers? And say, help me understand, how do we put the screws to these people? What's the best way to do that? Teach me about the system. And I would expect they do that. Why not? It makes financial sense for them to say, we need someone who understands the US legal system. And maybe someone like that has explained to them, hey, the problem is there's still a breach. So this whole pay us and you don't have to disclose, that doesn't really work anymore. Now people are freaked out because the Department of Justice is trying to put CISOs in jail for not reporting breaches. So let's go a different route. And maybe that's why. I was going to add too, I think it'll be interesting. I don't know how I feel about this offering, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see more, especially in litigation and class actions, more companies going to threat intel firms and saying, can you help me prove that these people's data was already out on the dark web? Because if it was,
interesting.
That's what I'm saying. There's no records left to steal, dude.
Yeah. No, it's naked pictures of your whatever.
Well, that's different.
But if it's your social security number, can you say, hey, you weren't harmed because you were already harmed? I don't know. I don't know if that would
left
work.
The barn with Experian.
Yeah.
Hey, well, I mean, a good attorney thinks about all the other things that the other attorneys will think of. So that's pretty good. We created this, before we started talking, but just 2024 action items here is, tell organization execs and board about this new tactic, because you don't, if you're here and your execs aren't here, your board's not here watching this, you want to let them know. You don't want them to be surprised either. Update your incident response plans and your breach communication plans. In case of a breach, will you know it was taken? Fred, that was your point. And understand your legal liabilities. Fred, what did I miss here? Everything in here?
I think you got most of the stuff there, Jake. The thing that I thought was interesting is Mike used the term terror. And I think the elephant in the room is, are we starting to creep up on something that approximates terrorism? Because the terrorism reach and the laws and the way they can be applied are vastly different than our criminal laws that we're applying right now. And I think we're getting there. I literally think we're getting to the point where this should be termed terrorism. Once individual people's lives are being upset in the way they are, that is terrorism. So I think we're there.
Yeah. I'd be very interested at some point to ask someone in the FBI about this, because the FBI has a lot of cybercrime and they have to prioritize it. And one of the ways they often prioritize it is by financial loss, which makes sense. I mean, I get you gotta you have to rank these things. You have to figure out which cases to go after. But you have to think in cases like this, even if there's very little financial loss, very little return rate, or whatever we talk about, the company is not paid, most people did not pay. Does the FBI change the way they prioritize this? Because like these people are being harassed with very sensitive things, and we need to prioritize this. I hope so. I don't know. And there's not a simple answer to that question, but it'd be interesting to see if they're thinking about this. I assume they are, and thinking about how do we decide where to focus, even if there's not financial loss, because there could be a lot of other types of harm here.
Yeah.
Sure.
I want to respond. So Lance says, terrorism is usually related to a political position or agenda. I feel that, and I can't prove this, but this could be, intentionally destabilizing, right? Done for a different purpose than collecting ill-gotten gains. Going after hospitals and medical records and terrorizing patients and getting us to sue each other into oblivion. That meets strategic goals of certain nation states. I'll just say that. And you're right. There was a rhetorical change from the White House a couple of years ago where they started talking about the use of ransomware in critical infrastructure. That makes you a terrorist, not a criminal. And I think we need to follow through with that.
For sure. So I'm going to do a couple quick things here, and then we're going to go to final thoughts. One, every time we do a panel, a webinar, we want to know how we did. Please take the survey. We love when you take the survey. Also, for everyone who takes the survey, we donate to an IT charity. And so please take the survey. Second is people are asking if they're going to get a link to this. Yes, everybody who registered will get a link if it is a computer and it is a system. And if it doesn't work, or if you need anything, I put my email address in the chat as well. We can help you tackle anything along with our partners at Davis Wright Tremaine. We help build incident preparedness plans. We help do tabletop exercises. We provide virtual CISOs, do risk assessments. We can help you with a communications plan. We can help monitor your network 24/7 with our XDR and the security operations centers, and we can help you respond decisively when something happens. Now, please sign up for Mike's daily email, come to our monthly security awareness training plans, and send any security awareness training, send anyone in your organization. They're free. We'd love to see you there. And there's my information. I can get you in contact with anyone here. There's Mike Borgia's information. And let's do some final thoughts here. And don't forget to take the survey while people are talking. We're going to go to Mike Borgia, then Mike Hamilton, then Fred. Mike Borgia, you first.
Well, hopefully I won't steal Nelson's thunder here, but I might. I think the main takeaway I think here is to prepare and to think about how you'll communicate, when you'll go out and when you won't. I think others want to talk about that, so I won't say everything, but I will say this. Don't put in a policy. Don't write down, we will never pay the ransom. I know that feels good, but you just never know. And there's no reason to say that in a policy. So instead of that, you have your policy, your IR plan, whatever it is, you can say, these people will make the decision or whatever. I mean, you can have ways of addressing that decision, but if you put in there, we will never pay that, I don't know. I'm not a superstitious person, but you got to be cautious because you never know what's going to happen.
You do indeed, Mike Hamilton.
So in this conversation, one of the things that I keep in the back of my mind is how much of this is domestic versus how much of it is on the other side of the world, right? A swatting threat from somebody in Uzbekistan cannot be taken seriously, really. I mean, there is a way to do it. You could use proxies, but I think proxies are starting to emerge domestically, and I think that geographical proximity could change a lot of what we're talking about here, right? The abstraction of somebody on the other side of the world is not the same as somebody who can throw a brick through a window, which has happened. And I'll say that I really do believe that our own laws are facilitating this, and we ought to take a look at that.
All right, Fred, final thoughts.
Yep. Put this in your tabletop, folks. Next tabletop, cover this, make sure management is fully aware of the decisions they're going to have to make.
All right. Well, on behalf of Fred and Mike and everybody at Davis Wright and Critical Insight, thanks for joining us and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Yep. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Take the survey. Take the survey. Take that survey.
Take that survey.